Michael, you construct properties, and number one rule basically for what makes a great property is location, location, location. Everybody knows that. But we want to know, what does it mean exactly? So what are you looking for in a great location?
Yeah, so you're right. I mean, this is number one rule in real estate. Location is a very big factor. I mean, you want to build and you want to invest where people are, because people use real estate. When we look at projects, I mean, we have a very defined criteria for what we look for in a project before we actually buy it. We operate in our markets, and we have a very clear definition for that. So we basically operate in the metropolitan areas, but the suburban areas of big cities, and also in B cities. That's our market, and as a macro location. So basically, when you think about a good macroeconomic location, you think about an area where there's generally good growth, good infrastructure, and generally a good environment for people to come there, and where you also have a good population growth, maybe, and also just basic economic data that we may look at, such as what's the per capita income, what is the population growth, what is the other demographic aspects, and also what's the employment rate. Those are just some basic examples, but this is something that we would look at in a macro location. On a micro level, when we look to a specific site or a specific land plot, I mean, we always have in the back of our head the product that we create there, and so we would look what is in the area surrounding it. I mean, you want to maybe avoid loud streets, so you look for emissions and noise, but you also look for things like infrastructure on a micro level. I mean, basic example, is there a bus stop or a subway stop nearby that people may walk to later in a short time? Is there a supermarket? And the person or the people that will live in this building, what are they going to do? I mean, do they have to travel a lot, or is maybe an employer next door? So those are good micro locations where you have not just a good macroeconomic location, this is the first step that we look at, but also a good micro location where people are drawn to. And this is something that we go through in a detailed analysis, and of course, I mean, it always varies a little bit. That's clear, because each market is different, but we get some basic idea and look at some basic aspects of that.
When factoring in what you mentioned about the macro and the micro location, and location in general, one could think that, well, the best of the best is just the city center of any A location, right? Munich, Berlin, Frankfurt. But then people say, but there it's so expensive. So probably that's not the solution either, huh? Should just take the best.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. I mean, when you want to have a good value for your investment, and so when we invest in a market, we also look at not just is the location itself great, because of course, I mean, if you get a plot in downtown Munich, that will be always very good plot with a lot of demand for it, but the question is of course always for what price. And especially in the recent years, the city centers, cities, they have been very crowded with investors, big players, and they have been very expensive. And what you also cannot forget, when you go to downtown Berlin is a very good example, but you have it in all of the big cities, you are very likely to also have a lot of political friction and regulation. It's typically an area where it's not so easy to build. And plus you have this high competition and high prices. So you want to get a location where you get a good value. That means you still have people moving there, you still have a good demand for it. but for a moderate investment. And between those two, I mean, that's where we have our niche, basically. And that's in these kind of markets we are looking for deals and we are looking for projects and creating buildings.
And you're not just having these government regulations while you're trying to build something, even afterwards with the rent cap that we had in Berlin. I mean, they abolished it, but it might come back.
Yeah, I mean, this is a classic example of how it's very difficult for investors. I mean, of course, investors can also make use of that, but what you may probably have is an empty apartment or developers who don't build. For us, this is a very difficult scenario, especially if you're not politically very well connected in this market and you don't know what may happen. Yeah, this is, I mean, it's a problem that you definitely have when you have a rent cap. You don't get the investment back or only over a very long horizon. And this is something that you have in big cities, in central locations mostly. And so we look for markets where we don't have these kind of problems, or at least not to this kind of degree.